Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the second day of MMX. As John mentioned, we have a group of panelists today that we're going to be focusing on technology transition, looking at the considerations and challenges for transitioning additive manufacturing technologies to production. And that we're going to touch on things like the identification, certification, validation processes, IP, supply chain, certification, validation, education, workforce development, and other related items. So we have a great team with us today that have experience in all of this, representing oil and gas industry, aerospace, medical. So a good synopsis of areas or and applications. With that, I'm going to just start with a brief introduction of all our panelists, and then we'll get into the discussions. So first we have Anjani from Baker Hughes. Would you like to say a few words? Do a little background on yourself?
I can't hear you, Georgette.
Oh, can you hear me now? I can hear you. Can anybody hear me? Yes, okay. Here, you can't hear. I'm gonna move on to Charles from J&J. He's a fellow for 3D printing materials and ceramics, and then we'll get back to Anjani.
Hi, I'm Chip Tamanto, engineering fellow for Johnson & Johnson. I work in the 3D printing innovation and customer solutions group. I've been working in medical device for about 36 years, 29 years with Johnson & Johnson. And the last 6 years, we've been working on a journey in additive manufacturing. My role is I run the University of Miami Johnson & Johnson 3D Printing Collaborative Lab, which is an enterprise role that's part of global supply chain within J&J. And our function is to develop parameter sets for new materials and early material development for the Johnson & Johnson franchises.
Thanks, Chip. Anjani, let's see if we can hear you.
I think this will work. Sorry about that.
That's okay. This is great.
Yeah, so good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, everyone. My name is Anjani Achanta. I'm with Baker Hughes, which is an energy technology company, about 54,000 employees in over 120 countries. So large company. My role in the organization that I've been with for about 15 years now, and the last 6 years have been in additive. And I run the technology center based out of Houston. By that, I want to indicate that there are additional additive centers globally across the company, some with more capabilities than the others. So I also have a dual role to connect our global additive centers across the company to make sure our investments are synergistic and we build on each other's capabilities. So that's me, and our group, and my role in particular is to drive additive proliferation across the company, but really deliver differentiated technology for the business as we grow in various areas.
Thanks, Anjani. I'm glad we got your your audio working here. So next we have Beth Ripley. She's from the VHA, Deputy Chief Office of Healthcare Innovation and Learning.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Ripley. I'm representing the collective efforts of Additive across the VA organization. Within VA, we've been printing dating back to about 10 years and counting, and we have over 200 printers across the organization embedded in 60 different hospitals, but really the focus of our work is in 3 main hospitals that we're really trying to push what point of care manufacturing means in the healthcare space.
And then we have Eric Fodrin, who I'm happy that we got him here and we can see his face here. He's with Nora Grumman Systems.
Thank you. Yes, I'm with Nora Grumman, specifically our aerostructures group. So the majority of what I'm supporting here is the maturation of all of our additive manufacturing modalities, really, both polymers. However, I specialize in metallics, although we've got a polymers team here that supports me. And in general, we are focusing on the maturation of additive manufacturing technologies to support our fleet of manned aircraft. However, throughout our corporation, we're employing additive manufacturing for all of our sectors platforms, not only our manned within the aerostructures, but also our unmanned systems, as well as our satellites and other directed energy platforms. And quite frankly, much as similar to that of our other OEMs, the vast majority of the motivation for all of our additive manufacturing implementation is simply to decrease our span time or decrease our overall costs. So we span the gamut of TRLs within that additive manufacturing implementation opportunity. However, within our manufacturing technology innovations group, we're focused primarily towards the MRL 4+, and then really bringing those home such that we can really impact our air vehicles as soon as possible.
Thanks, Eric.
Of course.
So with that, I'm going to just get right into our panel discussion questions, and I give each of you a few minutes to respond to the questions. The first one is, what are considerations made when identifying parts and transitioning AM technologies to production? Beth, you want to go first?
I'm probably the least qualified for this, because really what we're using additive for in the healthcare space within the hospital is really one of a kind type of devices. So we're really pushing into patient matched devices, whether that means orthotics, prosthetics, assistive technology devices, dental applications, or pre-surgical planning models. So there's no kind of large scale production per se for us. I might pass it on to the others that might have more of a prototyping and then production phase.
Sure. Chip, do you want to?
Yeah, where I would go with it is our transition. We've been in the business of additive manufacturing for a long time. Personalized medicine has always been an opportunity for additive. We started with personalized custom cutting guides for orthopedic applications, and we've been in that business for more than 10 years. But the key area is, what I want to tell you is that 3D printing isn't for everything. J&J designed parts to meet product needs and determine the most suitable manufacturing process to produce the parts. 3D printing has a space in our portfolio, and today the main emphasis has been in the area of surface for bone regrowth on prosthesis, devices where we put core structures on designs, and that's what's going to mass production. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Chip. And Johnny.
Sure. So on that topic, if you want to consider things you need to be thinking about to transition to production, I mean, we are right at the heart of it. Right? We're doing R&D, we're doing tech transfer, engineering, and also production at our center. So in my experience, building a good business case to make sure that it doesn't die a premature death, any kind of business case, because we are talking about cost so much, or the size of the part changes, or and we can't fit it in the MLM process that we may be looking at. So I feel like we need to business cases properly, where the life cycle of the whole component or that tool life is considered. Then I feel like it has a best chance to make it all the way into production. And more recently, having put many of our prototypes now in end use, we're getting more and more questions about process reliability, quality assurance. So that's another topic. It has been discussed so far in the conference. That's another area. And then just end-to-end workflows being very efficient is something we're looking a lot more closely now. We're finding out that the benefits that additive offers from a quick response time, lead time reduction are taken away when you have a lot of inefficient workflows while you're trying to productionize the environment. So that's a third area for me as far as considerations, transitioning technologies into production. One last point, we're going beyond the MLM and the DED processes and trying to combine processes to make sure that it's a best fit for the problem we're trying to solve. So there, I think maturity of certain additive processes over the others, that's another area for us to see us adopt more modality.
Thanks, Anjani. And Eric.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot within our aerostructures group that we have to take into consideration for potential implementation of additive manufacturing technologies. And as was spoken before, Charles was saying, tools, guides, and whatnot, that's now very commonplace for us, and that's actually one of the first places in which we have employed additive manufacturing to try to accelerate our actual labor force on the floor and the assembly line. We've gone considerably beyond that now. One of the first considerations and motivations for the first implementation, which is back in 2005, on an air vehicle, is really being able to manufacture something responsibly for a very unique application for our customer. And the Navy was looking for a demonstration vehicle manufactured fairly readily, and we had a price point that we needed to meet, and was able to do so with titanium electron beam additive manufacturing, which was a big step in the right direction for us, which is good. But now, as we're maturing the technologies more and trying to implement it more widely, I'd say one of the first things that we really need to get a better understanding across the board is the level of criticality that we're willing to maintain today. And I'll say that the Air Force has put together a fairly strong stress memo to give us guidance to that now. That was just released, I think, the year before last, whereas before we didn't have that level of guidance. So I think we were, in many ways, treading our own path. But thankfully, with a little bit more guidance in that regard, we're really taking a building block approach, crawl, walk, run, moving forward with the MEXIP non-structural applications and trying to implement them today with the data sets that we've developed. And our hope is to expand that onto structural applications. That's obviously going to take more testing and more demonstration, more structural demonstration in itself. But that's the normal progression forward, and that's also something we've got to be cognizant of as we move forward.
Thank you. But when you're looking to transition these AM technologies to production, what about things like powder management, powder reuse, space considerations, things like that? What are some things that you look at when you're looking to move towards production?
Good question. From the standpoint of powder management, I can't say that I'm very well versed in that per se, but I will say we've definitely performed a significant level of studies to understand powder reuse, and we're capping powder reuse in our process specifications based on our compositional change that we observed, as well as our performance change that we have observed. But from a handling standpoint, I can't comment to that. So maybe one of the other panelists could.
Sure, I can take a stab at it. The first things first, our material specification is tied to 3 sub-specifications, one of which is powder spec. And maybe that's the case, everyone else might be doing that. But as far as powder management, in order to, we understand the criticality of, maintaining that powder quality. And more recently, some of the issues we're seeing is, hey, you can't run certain powders because you're now in a facility that was not designed with this powder in mind. And so as we're trying to grow things organically at our site and have people adopt, it happened in an existing facility that was not designed for running titanium powder, let's say. So we're seeing some of those facility-related restrictions crop up as they're getting more mature. And then how we hold powder, how much powder do we have to have on hand? How do we identify what should be our strategy as we try to source different powder manufacturers? That's another topic we're looking into. And then I think the handling itself is somewhat limited by the machines that we're using and what is allowed, and some of the architecture tied to the machine itself. And we have some that are antique at this point in the additive life cycle, and some that are very new and have a different way of maintaining. So it's a bit all over the place, I would say, but we're learning as we go.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll throw in some here. In the medical space, powder management is critical for us. We did a lot of characterization work early when we did parameter set development for each of the materials that we use. And with that, we developed material specifications. And then we must procure and inspect the material when we receive it ourselves in order to certify that the materials meet specification. Lab traceability is very important on the medical device space because we must have the ability to show that we know where the raw material came from that goes in each and every part we produce. We then manage on the system, we sieve material and we mix the powder. It's very important to mix powder as received because when it's shipped, it could potentially change the distribution within the container. And so there's a lot of work done there to make sure that you've got precision mixing. And then all the material we receive is always backfilled with inert gas. The lot sizes that we use in printing are custom. The material is custom tailored to the lot size. So we make sure that we've got the right amount of material in the printer, but also that it's in increments of lots so that we're not sitting there with excess powder that hit the reuse size. And then only one lot of material is used in the printer at one time for J&J. That way we ensure the lot control. On powder reuse, we've done a lot of work to understand how many times we can reuse powder with extensive studies, and then their standard operating procedures are set up based on the technical data associated with the specific material and the powder producer. And so that's how we manage powder, J&J.
Thanks, Chip. I'm going to move on to the next topic on looking at technoeconomic risks. So what are some of the realities with that and looking at the economics of moving towards additive? You may want to go first. See, Chip, you're still off mute, so I'm going to go with you. Start
Okay.
with you.
Again, in the methods of analyzing the economic performance of the industrial process, product and services, J&J will use the best manufacturing processes for the best cost of goods of production. So how do we determine rates and costs? We've got software models to estimate capital costs, operating costs, and revenue based on technical and financial input parameters, and then we use cost models to assuming that we're going to develop a process that reduces cost over time and utilizes the material, the machines to the maximum optimization. So the goal is just like any other process, bring it in. It costs a lot at the beginning, but then as you scale that through the new product introduction cycle into production, you get the standard cost down. And that's our pathway.
Thanks. How about Eric?
I think some of the risks that we see with the technology in its current state, it really revolves around the changes within the industry itself. we standardize our processes to certain models, certain software releases, and as those are modified, I think there are significant risks in ensuring that either the software release or the next model of laser powder bed fusion or electron beam powder bed fusion machine that we've already qualified meets our process specifications in the manner in which we've already developed our allowables data set. So we're definitely trying to understand how to better control and accommodate that, but that's definitely a risk that we see on the horizon.
And Anjani?
Yeah, sure. So, we struggle with how to get started in a way that you can justify these upfront investment that you need for additive. Where we sort of made peace with and moved on is we're looking at not just the part manufacturing cost, but we convinced ourselves that the business impact, I mentioned end-to-end life cycle of the part, right? Along those lines, when we have downtime at a rate and there is this one part that can save the day, which could mean $1 million a day type of rate time, that's worth doing. That's worth printing that part for. Whether it's 10 times more expensive than a traditionally manufactured part, it's a no-brainer still to go print that part. So that lead time benefit, that new revenue opportunities that we're after, and the overall business impact that additive brings, I think definitely offsets or justifies some of the investment that we've had to make, and the organization now understands that. So we're no longer measuring our utilization against the same benchmark as traditional manufacturing. And I think that's how it's going to have to be. And we are fortunate that our management, our organization is starting to understand that. It wasn't easy to have to justify every single part that we've had to print in the past, but I think now we're building a better justification and business case going forward.
So the
Have to be in that place because it was tough to get this far.
So big thing is not comparing it to traditional per se, but seeing the big picture benefit of it, of the whole system there that you're changing, or the whole life cycle of the part benefit type of thing.
And in our case, it's always going to be high complexity, low volume type of business, unlike maybe aerospace or elsewhere in medical. So yeah, that's right.
Sure. Beth? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think thinking from the perspective of point of care manufacturing or the hospital where we don't traditionally manufacture, it's a little different on the value prop, because we're not talking about traditional versus additive. We're talking about nothing versus bringing in something new, which is additive. And, additive makes sense, obviously, from the ability to make patient matched or low volume parts, but also ironically too from the footprint, right? So it's quite attractive at first look that you could have a small footprint with this great variability. But what we've found with a lot of hospitals adopting this technology is, you think about, what's the economic risk of the cost of the printer, but really the cost of the printer is a very small fraction of what you're looking at, because you have to think about the printer retrofitting your facility or space to meet the requirements of the printer, especially if you're talking beyond, prosumer printers, the staff, the software, etc. So the costs kind of are deceptively larger than one might think. But I think, for us, the return on investment can be financial. We think a lot about cost savings and cost avoidance, particularly if we can get care to patients faster or get them care that is not available on the market. But also, some of the flexibility that we've seen in terms of, again, getting things fast or avoiding all of the ongoing supply chain disruptions that continue to kind of reverberate through the healthcare field and beyond. I think the peace of mind to have that capability is huge. And I think it was Chip that said, sometimes paying 10 times more for a part makes sense if you can't get the part. So there's some really interesting ROI to think about in that space.
Great points. Thank you all. I'm gonna move on to IP associated with the parts that you're making and how that's being handled. You all are in some sensitive industries here, and we're all here at this MMX event wanting to share information, but there's some challenges too with the IP side. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I guess I'll start. Number one, all of the products that we produce, we hold patents for. So product level, additive manufacturing or any other product, we would have a patent position for that. On the process side, normally we consider that trade secret based, and so in that typical area, we control the information that we share. I think that's a fair statement at this time. So we'll get there.
I would say similarly at Northrop, all of our specifications and all of our design is controlled. Another facet of IP that we find is different for every one of the service providers that we engage within, and unique is the manner in which they support the builds. And I think that is, to their accolade, their own secret sauce per se to ensure the maximum quantity of build success and throughput. So on our end, we give them the latitude to employ that, and then we ask them to validate each of their IP schemes, and then we hold those static for any build that they actually fabricate for us. So there's definitely multiple levels of IP that we're navigating, and that's fine, especially within the advanced state of technology we've got now. But we find we have our own IP, and we find that each of the service providers has their own unique as well.
Yeah, so Georgette, no different from what Chip said for us as well. One thing to add is as we understand our lanes, right? Who has IP where? Definitely on the process optimization, we consider it a trade secret as well. It's tied to the cost topic that we talked about earlier. We're able to optimize costs significantly with our recipe, like a lot of other people in the space. So that being said, I think maybe our next topic will be on the supply chain piece, but how do we manage these agreements seamlessly where there is more and more appetite to collaborate and accelerate what we all want to do? This is where these IP agreements, I hope that as we all evolve in the additive space, that these are more clear and more efficient. We've been hung up talking to some of our partners and not settling on IP ownership and never moved on that partnership. So yeah, more work there.
I can just say from our part, it really depends on what we're talking about. We do have a lot of frontline staff innovations within VHA, and if we're talking about a part that's being produced via additive, that's truly a unique new device or good, we go through the normal customary chain for government in terms of that IP. But a lot of what we're doing, again, in the patient match space, may not be applicable to IP depending on what it is. I agree. There's a counter to this too. If you're open with your designs, which we wanted to be during the pandemic, and some of the the PPE and other types of designs, there's the catch-22 that you could share your designs, and because the process is so critical to the part, you may end up with people creating something totally different than what you intended. So I think it's challenging on both ways. And it's that process optimization that really is, I think, where some of the most important, whether it's trade secret or intellectual property, resides. One of our interests within VHA at the point of care space specifically is to figure out how to kind of dial in some of those common processes and share that out as a deliverable, just to boost, the quality and consistency at the point of care space. But, I think it's going to be challenging.
Georgette, I think you're mute.
You're muted.
That talking away here. No, thank you for all those insights. I mean, IP sounds like it's definitely something that could continue to be looking at each of the technology roadmap areas that we heard right before the break here, on how we can, with that general information we can share with everybody. Because it sounds like you all have an interest in it. It's just a matter of how you properly share that process information. I'm going to move into supply chain networks, and most of you, if not all of you, are working, both nationally and internationally. How do you view the supply chain for Additive today, and what challenges do you see from a sourcing perspective?
From an aerospace perspective, I believe it's still pretty limited, pretty small. We're starting to implement and transition more and more metallic AM components, and we're bringing on newer suppliers and qualifying them. It's a time-consuming level of effort, and there isn't a huge myriad of entities within the supply chain that is really prepared to do that. There's strengths in both a small, flexible, responsive supply chain entity, service bureau, and there's also strengths in much larger service bureaus. And in both, they have very unique challenges in becoming onboarded for airframe or aerospace and defense articles. So I believe there's a lot of growth that's going to need to occur to really satisfy the type of implementation that we are forecasting in the upcoming years.
Do you see gaps in getting materials right now when you need them, or?
Material, no, but actual fabrication, yes.
Okay, which is part of the process.
Correct.
Yeah.
So powder, we don't see a challenge in getting that qualified to our material specifications. It's really getting supply chain entities from an additive manufacturing service bureau actually on board and onto our ASPL today.
Got it. But you, Chip?
In our situation, we again are national and international. So we purchase through a central strategic sourcing group for all of the J&J franchises, the 280 plus companies. We haven't seen a problem in material supply at this point. We produce internally and externally, and our external partners are required to come up to the standards that we maintain. So they have to do the installation qualifications, the operation qualifications, the product qualifications. They have to demonstrate that they can make the parts to meet form, fit, function, just like we have to internally, which, by the way, is no different than any traditional manufacturing approach that J&J uses with external companies. And so that does limit the number of external users that we have, because that's quite a lot of work in order to be prepared that way. But once we have dedicated pathways into external manufacturers, we use them just like they're internal to the company. So I think the challenges for proprietary material, again, we execute full characterization of material. We define material specs, we execute material validations for all the materials and the supplier provided materials, and then only qualified materials and suppliers will be used in production. And that's how we manage it. But that, again, is no different than we've done traditionally on traditional manufacturing.
I like the point you've been making about the similarities to traditional manufacturing. I know a lot of times additive is viewed totally different, but there are some similarities to standard processes, manufacturing processes as well. Anjani?
Sure. So our processes are very similar to what Chip just mentioned. Where my thought is I think the supplier base is more restricted than what's obvious, but additive experts understand the issue with machine-to-machine variability. So transfer is not all that simple, even on the exact same model and make. We're not able to produce the same results within the company. And so we would expect the same challenge with our suppliers. That said, we do have a global network of printers, and each of these machines is slightly different. And we have to be prepared to expect a slightly different result that is also within the acceptable limit. So that's been our approach. We do outsource mostly, where we have to deal with materials that either aren't qualified internally or aren't allowed to be run for whatever reasons tied to facility restrictions. So that's been our approach. We still find ourselves having capacity internally and want to leverage that before we develop suppliers. And where we do, it's for a very specific process or material that we can't do in-house. That's been our approach. Another point I would like to bring up is I think this will tie back to the standards we will talk about later. The qualification methodology is also different from what we're doing versus what our suppliers may be doing. And that's not always very transparent, and the level of rigor is different. And so what happens is when you mandate a certain qualification method, that takes a while. And when that's different, we're reading standards that certain requirements have to be met when you change the source of supply. And so we're constantly debating if it's worth that effort to requalify or just continue low rate production in-house. And for the most part, it's in-house still for us for those reasons.
Thanks. Thank you. Beth?
I'd throw in just a few more things here. A lot of the point of care hospitals are printing not only with powder bed, but using vat photopolymerization or material jetting. And when you get into some of those materials, we have seen disruptions in the supply chain, predating, and postdating COVID. So I think, those are things we think about. And even the post-processing, there was quite a lot of difficulty in getting IPA at one point. So we do see that, and we do think about that, and we are changing how we think about what we do moving forward because of that. Looking for materials that can be stored in bulk for long periods of time. Some of the materials are, have pretty short shelf lives, which can be of greater challenge. And also we have a strong preference for domestic manufacturing, so manufacturing on U.S. soil with U.S. goods. So that's also something that we'll be factoring into our future product development.
Thank you. Thank you all for all those insights. As you're moving towards getting parts into production, what are some of your thoughts on ways that product development, qualification, certification, all of that could be accelerated in any way? And I'm going to loop in one of the questions that has been asked too. If and how can real-time in situ monitoring help with that whole process? So I figured it's a good topic to add in the in situ monitoring, if and how that could maybe help with the qualification certification piece of it.
I would say at Northrop, we're definitely leveraging the in-process monitoring today from a quality assurance standpoint at that stage. it's a natural progression to look at how we can employ in-process monitoring to ensure that, at least at this stage, we can detect anomalies within the process and correlate them to real rejectable or acceptable deviations within the system and what they result in within the actual product that we're manufacturing. Our intent is to try to mature that to a state of a more accelerated qualification. However, from our standpoint, we believe that's going to be a very long road, but we hope that's the destination we attain.
Thank you. Chip, do you want to go next?
Yeah, where I go with it is, first thing is in design of new products, 3D printing, additive manufacturing has absolutely accelerated design pathways. We now have the ability to design multiple characteristics on a product, print them all at the same time, and then optimize portions of the design very, very rapidly instead of doing it one at a time. So we've seen tremendous acceleration on new product development based on additive manufacturing. Very strong play there. In regards to in situ monitoring, we like it very much. I've got it on one of my printers in the lab. We're looking at it for the same reasons everybody else is as a potential quality tool, and maybe the ability to correct issues with fast feedback return in the future, so that instead of building the whole part, you can stop the part, or you can decide not to make that part and continue if you're mass producing, for example. And so there's work going on in that space. It isn't ready, and so it's not in production with us at this point, but certainly open and interested.
Thank you. Anjani?
So 2 parts to your question. How do we accelerate product development, qualification, certification? And I'm thinking of a couple of our examples. What I found most successful is in our organization is picking the right problem to solve, where additive is a huge enabler, whether it's to solve a supply chain problem or lead time issue or a performance enabler. And once you land on that, both from the customer point of view and us at Baker Hughes as a service provider, identify that problem, I find that organizational alignment, for us to design, get acceptance on material, line up whatever unique testing is needed because this part is now printed and not manufactured the conventional way. So that stakeholder alignment, when everybody sees the value, is bought in, and we understand it's a problem worth solving, I find that things go much, much faster in a larger organization, because there are people understand the technology and the risks, and so you plan for those validation activities, whether it's design or testing, and everybody's on board. Now, the part about quality assurance, which comes in next, certainly in-process monitoring is helpful. Where that enables more things is, the criticality of parts that we are dealing with is get more and more serious, because the more data you have, the more comfortable our customers are, whether it's compliant with an industry standard or not. They're willing to open the door and say, hey, let's do some custom testing here. Let's minimize the risk to our operations. Let's see what data you have to assure us that the risk isn't as high. So that's where I think multiple in-process monitoring is going to be helpful. Yes, I don't believe that it's fully productionized yet, but we are using it in some capacity already. So overall, or alignment in the organization to solve the right problem makes things go faster for us. And yeah, we'll use whatever tools we have to mitigate the technical risk.
Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
I would say it's, I don't think that you could see design and product development in the hospital without additive would be quite a challenge, just just the way the workflow works. And what's been really helpful for us is, we like to capture the surgeons or physicians or prosthetists or whoever that end user is, and get really early input in the design process. And being able to print out prototypes and change on a daily basis based on their feedback is really critical, because if you walk away for weeks and then come back, their mind has gone somewhere. It's just the chaos of the environment. So I think having that captive audience and being able to deliver to them up front really incentivizes them to buy into something that normally you wouldn't see them involved with. Also, I think, as problems come up, the ability to go from problem to prototype, or actually maybe end product in 7 to 14 days makes a huge difference, and is a huge value prop for us. In terms of thinking about the in situ monitoring, I think that's quite interesting. We're not doing that currently. We do have monitoring steps prior to going to printing to make sure that, from a design perspective, that we have the right file in the right format, and that things line up. The post-processing step actually has a pretty profound impact on some of the products we're putting out, as well as sterilization. So I think even with the in-process validation, verification, we still would want to kind of continue beyond that point.
Thank you.
Add an example, Georgette, if we have time.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I just wanted to give an example just to add to some of the points made here. Yeah, we had a cylindrical part that is meant to be a debris barrier. It's a screen type component. It took a total of 10 weeks from when we got the request to when we were ready with the final design to go into production. And what it took, and it ended up being cheaper as well, having redesigned it. So the process we went through was to stack multiple quantities or multiple units on top of each other on the build plate with a slightly different design variable, and quickly iterate on the design. Not only was it additive friendly a design, it really helped us rapidly iterate and then end up with a final solution in a span of 10 weeks. That, relatively speaking, is very fast for us, and received customer acceptance. So my point here is, when you have cases like these that are very, very successful to the business, we do a lot of internal marketing for people to understand what the possibilities are, and that goes a long way to accelerating more things or bringing up new opportunities that are more suitable for additive. And that's been key to the success we've had so far.
Thank you for that real-time example. I think that's always helped to really emphasize the answer there. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I'm gonna go to the question, some of the questions and answers out there. But I know we had a whole session on education and workforce development, but for when it's specific to technology transition and some of the challenges you see, what are some things that you see as working well and or a gap from the education and workforce development perspective? Anybody want to go first? Chip, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. The first thing that is very obvious to us is everybody looks at a part and says, and thinks about it as if it's a traditionally manufactured part. Can you make it like this? Does it look like that? Not specifically designing with the advantages of additive. So one of the first training activities that J&J did was to teach people how what can be made this way, what should be made this way, and how to take advantage of the significant opportunities that you achieve using additive manufacturing. We then went into training, a second level training. This was all done internally on how parts are made and all of the characteristics that are important on printing parts. For example, support structures on laser powder bed fusion, and how best to use that. And so I think we got ahead of the curve because our internal training teams got developed quite a while ago to get out the information. But since then, all of the great work by the ASTM team on these personal certification programs, we've looked at, and we're now promoting some of the outside certification pathways internal to the company for training. And so I think that's probably our answer to the question.
Thank you. I'm Johnny.
I can
Go ahead.
I could jump in here. You know, it's a really exciting but kind of challenging time. I think when you're thinking about bringing in staff manufacturing additive into the hospital space, because not only do we need to understand the additive technology, but to understand the hospital environment as well, and the medicine and the policies and procedures that go into that as well. So most of the people in the field right now are self-taught, hybrid type people. So we've got engineers, we have artists, graphic designers, X-ray, CT techs, physicians. It really runs the gamut. And I think in a way we've been richer for it because we have those different perspectives coming together, but that's not sustainable, nor is it scalable. So thinking about what the training needs to look like in this field is quite important. Again, I don't know if this is, you know, something that's a trade, you know, that you learn on the job. It's just something you learn in school. We're interested in thinking about repurposing existing staff and giving them new skills to bring them into this space. But, you know, it requires a delicate mix of engineering know-how, you know, attention to detail, the ability to deal with chaos in the hospital, talk to surgeons, and also think about, you know, two different groups, FDA and Joint Commission, so two different governing bodies depending on where the work is. So there's a lot to do, but I think it's a really rich environment, and I think it's a really rewarding career path for those that are going to choose it in the future. So
great points. Anything to add from Eric or on Johnny there?
I would say it's similar to what Chip had said. We generally manufacture additively what we would otherwise subtractively initially, and then from there, once we convince ourselves that that works out, we are going towards a more complex additive geometry. And we also don't have a lot of experience in design teams that are comfortable with doing so. Even more so, we don't have a lot of experience in the analytical side, stress engineers, structural engineers who are comfortable with now analyzing those unique geometries. I think those tool sets are maturing, and the experience of those who are using those tool sets are maturing, but that's still a gap that we see.
Head on, Johnny.
Sure. So what we've done, a few years ago is, learn how to train the rest of the organization on what we know while trying to learn it ourselves, the core additive team. And I find that whether it's about identifying the right part or knowing what materials are suitable or designing or how to process or print that, there's a minimum knowledge that is required in the entire organization. So we got past that phase. And now as I try to look for engineers or operators, any kind of skill set, I find that it is something we're having to grow in-house over time. It's getting better, but nothing like practicing additive to be an expert in additive, right? So the approach we're taking is to really, people that are further away from the center and access to the equipment, to rotate them into the additive team to force that more naturally, but to force that to start. So, hey, you're going to spend X amount of time in the additive group, learning how to design, how to run the machine, stay close to the machine, see what some of the practical considerations are, and then rotate out into the business that we support. So I find that to be the best approach for us. But that said, we worked with the Barnes group. I don't know, John, if you're on the call, but many sessions over the last 3-4 years where they've come in and delivered a 2.5-day training for our engineering staff, and that's we'll take that any day because that's helping us as well. It's a great exposure to everything that's possible at a high level for the engineers to then, figure out how they can apply to their ongoing projects. So I found that helpful as well.
Great feedback on that topic. So thank you all for those comments. I'm going to go to some of the questions here. One of the first ones here that had the most votes. How do we make it faster for trusted service bureau partners licensing and using the secret sauce process across companies to meet customer manufacturing rates? Any thoughts on how to get in, which, in my words there, using the service bureaus, how can we expedite being able to use them as trusted agents? I know we touched on this a little bit before, but any thoughts on that? Anything they could be doing?
ICE side, they could get qualified with the FDA. They could put in the medical quality system, 13483.
Would AS 9100 certified help you out, Eric? I'm just thinking on aerospace. You're on mute. Sorry.
Certain that's a necessity. I'm kind of racking my brain to think of, from an overall qualification standpoint, it really just requires that they're all very familiar with how to control the variables within each of their platforms. And we just assume that all of our service bureaus are already there, but unfortunately, not everyone's at the same place, so that makes it a little tough.
Oh, the dreaded John came on.
Hi, friend. How are you?
Hey, John.
How are you all?
Good.
Well, thank you so much. We are officially out of time. So we need to move on to our next favorite topic after tech transition, which is education and workforce development. So,
which we gave them a lot of.
What's that?
They've got lots of good ideas to start with.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of your sharing.